All right, welcome everyone to the second edition of our Getting Started webinar series for the Maps SDK for iOS. So I'm joined today by Patrick Leonard, who's an iOS engineer here at Mapbox. I have a slide on him in a second, but I guess while we're here, if you're watching, you're probably already familiar with Mapbox. But for those who are just tuning into this after the fact on YouTube, be sure to take a quick look at our website and our docs and learn more about the Mapbox ecosystem. We do a lot more than just the map making, but there's lots of data moving around. We do navigation services, geocoding, that sort of thing. So go take a look. So Patrick, mapper, data wrangler, mobile engineer. Here's his contact information if you want to get in touch with him on Twitter. He's going to be talking us through these three topics today. So adding a custom style design in Mapbox Studio to your iOS map, bringing in your own data to the map using GeoJSON, and exploring elevation and camera manipulation. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to Patrick. Just while we're in the middle of the presentation, those of you who please pull up the chat window, and I'll be monitoring that and can pass your questions along. So if you have a question, just ask it in there. Patrick would love for this to be a conversation. We would all love for it to be a conversation. So just and let us know what you'd like to hear, and then we'll also have a more formal sort of question period at the end if you want to ask something that's not necessarily related to what's being presented. So we'll see you in chat, and then and with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Thanks, Chris. I'll just pull up my screen to share. Great. All right. Well, welcome all. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for joining again if you joined our basics session held towards the end of last year. Today, we're going to dive into some more advanced topics. So I've started with some code already in place, just so that we have a launching off point. Just as a brief overview of what we have here. So we've imported the Mapbox Maps package, which gives you access to all of the Mapbox tools, all of the APIs you need in order to build your map experience. We also have resource options in your access token. This is important for getting access to Mapbox resources, such as map tiles and any other additional data that you want to pull from Mapbox. We have an early level camera, just to set the stage. We'll do a lot more work with camera afterwards. And then we pull it all together in the map init options, which kind of builds the map at the beginning. So just to show you where we're getting started from, can do a quick run of our application. As you can see here, we have just a satellite map that's loaded with that actually started at our center point with 0 bearing and 0 pitch. Great. If there are no questions to get started, I'm going to start right away with adding your own custom style for Mapbox Studio. If you aren't familiar with Mapbox Studio, it's a great tool for creating your own map styles. So here, a map style is like, this is the satellite map style. And as you can see, it has satellite data as well as some labels on top of it. If you zoom in, you can see more, those labels pop in. And what a map style does is it displays the data in a certain way to achieve a particular end. So if you go into Mapbox Studio and create a new style, you can see there are a couple different options for kind of base styles that you can then modify. So we have streets, which is kind of like your standard map you can go to. It has a strong highway network that you can pull from. We also have some options for data visualization. So this one is monochrome. We have a few different color options here. So as you can see, the data is staying the same across these different map styles, and this map style is just visualizing that data in a different way. So it's visualizing, say, the label New York in blue here, whereas in the dark style, it's visualized in white. We encourage you to create your own styles, and we have a few different styles in Mapbox Studio just to get started. One of my favorites is outdoors, which is really great for kind of hiking or biking activities. We also have some navigation ones available if you want kind of more emphasis on navigation use cases. So you'll see road shields and signs and that kind of information.
Hey, Patrick, we have a quick question from
Great.
Ryan who's watching the webinar and says, is it best to use Mapbox Studio or layers and styles inside of the SDK? I assume he's talking about just locally loading layers versus creating them in Mapbox Studio. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're actually going to do both today. So there are two different approaches here. So a Mapbox style is made up of sources which hold data and then layers which display that data in different ways. And so you can manipulate them in Mapbox Studio yourself, or you can change them on the SDK side. My general recommendation is if you think that display is going to change at runtime based upon user input, then to put that in the SDK. Whereas if you think that it's mostly static and it's not going to change over time, then it's better to do it in Mapbox Studio. So for example, if we start with monochrome style here, maybe we'll go with this light blue option, sky. So if you always wanted your labels, let's see, to be like a particular color, then you would maybe want to change that in Mapbox Studio. But if you say wanted your labels to change color when a user clicks on them, then I would recommend doing that in the SDK. So it depends a bit on your use case and whether or not you would like to have users' behavior change how the map is seen. Mapbox Studio or making changes in Mapbox Studio also has the advantage of a kind of a consistent map across Mapbox platforms. So say you have an iOS app, an Android app, and then a web app using GeoJS. If you make the change in the style in Mapbox Studio, that change will be reflected across all of those platforms. And so that can be nice if you want a consistent user experience, to always have the same colors show up, to always have that kind of same experience for the users there. Yeah, great question. And we'll show you how to change layers from the SDK in a little bit as well. So great question to get started.
I'll like to throw in there that like I tend to, when I show this to people, I would like to say that like a lot of times you'll do customizations in Studio, and that will end up being kind of your starting point once you get into the app. And then any changes you want to make afterwards, you can do programmatically, you know, from the in the client side. So yeah, make your like major changes here, and then have them saved, and then serve them up to your apps.
That's right. Yeah, and I think one more thing that's also nice about Mapbox Studio is it's great to see the changes instantly. So they have these like options to change base colors, and you can kind of experiment very quickly, where sometimes it takes longer in the SDK to make the change, do the build, and see the changes. Here you can kind of manipulate at will. So it's a bit faster for prototyping as well, especially if you're more on the design side of the house. Great. So once you've created the style and made some changes and really got it to a place you're looking for, you want to pull that style into your application. So to do that, first you want to publish your changes here. You'll see a quick comparison just to make sure that you're comfortable with it. You'll publish it. And then you want to you'll press the share button, and you want to take what's called the style URL. And that's kind of like an ID for your Mapbox style. And you'll use the same one across different Mapbox platforms. But if you want it, you can pull it from the web one, or you can pull it from iOS. But that's what tells the Mapbox servers to show the style you designed. So it's a unique ID for you. So we'll copy that here, and then we'll jump back to our code. And right now we have our style URI as the satellite streets, which is one of the default styles that Mapbox makes available to you without needing to go through Mapbox Studio. So there are a few different options for those. So if you just do a dot here, you can see we have streets, we have satellite streets, and satellite, which is satellite streets but without labels. We also have light and dark modes. So those are great if you just want to have like a quick style, kind of like a base layer for yourself. But if you want to add a custom one, you want to go through and add a style URI, and then you want to pull from a raw value. And you can just enter that style URI right here. And you'll see that it'll have your Mapbox account here. Mine's PL Mapbox, and then this code, which is like the unique ID for that. So let's go ahead and load that. Cool. So as you can see, we have a new map style applied. That is this nice blue color. The map load was the same. It just switched out the actual style that was loaded here. So you can zoom in and see we have these urban areas are highlighted, but all in this kind of monotone blue option. You'll also notice when this loaded, that was slightly different from before, is that this has a globe base, which if you're interested, we have two different projection options, or one projection option and one globe. So we have the Mercator, which is kind of our standard option. And then now we've recently introduced this globe option, which gives your user kind of a more holistic understanding of where they are on the Earth there. So this, as you can see, if you are maybe not as comfortable with code, this is a pretty quick way to make changes in Mapbox Studio, which is a bit more of a visual experience, and then pull those pretty quickly into an iOS app. So it lowers the barrier a bit for you if you want a kind of a lower code solution as well. Great. Any questions about pulling in your Mapbox Studio style? Cool. All right. Next, we're going to dive into using GeoJSON to pull in some additional data at runtime. If you're not familiar, GeoJSON is a standard, like a web standard for sharing geographic data. So it translates lines and points into a machine-readable set of geographic data. So we're going to create a GeoJSON here in geojson.io, which is a tool purpose-built for this application to view and analyze GeoJSON data. So I'm going to start with just pulling in a few different a line segment here. So I'm going to connect some cities. So maybe from New York down to Rio. We'll go over to Lagos. Let's see, go up to Berlin, and then go to Jakarta here. And what you'll see here is we've created this kind of connecting line that is this array of coordinates in the form of a line string. For your use case, this may be a route line. For if you have a navigation application, this could be a flight path for a plane. It really could be anything that you'd like. And so we're just going to copy this whole item and then go back, and we're going to put this as a GeoJSON string in our application. Oh, I have a space there. GeoJSON. This is a type string. We'll have this feature collection here. And we'll just want to make sure to have the final 3 lines for a multi-line string. And then next, we're going to use this little helper function I've created before called decode GeoJSON. And what this does is it takes a GeoJSON string and converts it to a feature collection, which is a Swift type that we can manipulate more easily. So as you may know, Swift is a strongly typed language. So in order to work with an item like a string, you want to turn it into this actual Swift struct. So this is what feature collection looks like. The backend. So it's a struct in Turf, which is a geospatial library. It has features that have geometries and as well as assorted information. So that's all that this decode function is doing. It is taking this string and turning it into a Swift object so that we can manipulate it later. Great. So to start with, we're going to add, going to create a function called add GeoJSON. And put this Let's start with creating this feature collection. And that's going to be the result of this decode GeoJSON, and then the input string we had before, which is this GeoJSON. We're going to give our GeoJSON an ID, so it'll be new data, for example. And then we're going to create a source in the Mapbox map. So leave our GeoJSON source. And then we'll set, once we've created that source, we'll set the data that we just added to that source. So it'll just be feature collection and then feature collection. Finally, we're going to add that source to the map. So we'll have to wrap this in a do try. And then we'll add it to the style source. And our source ID is the GeoJSON, or excuse me, our source is the GeoJSON, and then the source ID is the GeoJSON ID. And then just in case we have any errors, we'll catch them here. I'll just say failed to add GeoJSON source. And we can also print out the actual error for help debugging later. Great. And so adding a GeoJSON source just adds the data. It doesn't style the data or visualize it anyway. So in addition to adding the GeoJSON source, we'll also have to add a layer to view that actual data, which in this case is this line string. So here, we'll just do a var line layer. We'll add this line layer. For an ID, we'll just name it line layer for now. In your project, you'd probably want something more descriptive, like route line or something to that effect. For the source of this layer, we're going to make it the GeoJSON ID. And then we're also going to add some styling here. So in this line layer, we're going to add a line color of, let's see, I think maybe orange would be a good idea. And then also a width, just because we're viewing it from pretty low level zoom. So we'll want it to be pretty broad. So let's add a width. And then the last item we want to do is add it to the map itself. So we'll add a try, map view, map, style, and then we'll add this layer here. Layer, not add source. And that layer is line layer. I'll go ahead and run this again. Great. See, and we do not have a layer. Why is that? GeoJSON. So we have our feature collection. We have our GeoJSON ID. We have our source, our line. Oh, I see. we didn't actually run the add GeoJSON function, which would be helpful. So in order to do that, we want to just add a quick event watcher. So this is map view on next. And then we'll run it when the map loads in this case. So there are a few different events that you can wait for in the Mapbox map in order to trigger different actions. So in this case, we're waiting for the map loaded event, which triggers once the actual kind of base map has loaded. You can also have different events like when the camera has changed or when the map is being interacted with. And these give you ways to add user interaction or to wait for certain types of user interaction in a live experience. So here we'll just run our quick function self.addGeoJSON. And now that should actually trigger running this. Great. All right, so as you can see, we have this very big orange line that now travels across the coordinates that we passed for that GeoJSON. So it connects each of these cities. It's orange, it's pretty wide, and connects all those cities.
Quick question for you, Patrick.
Yes.
You added a couple of different properties to your line layer, including line color and line width. So I posted a link in the chat showing the Mapbox style spec, Mapbox GL style spec. So I think it's important to show that all the different options for what you can do to these layers are in there. I'm curious, as an iOS developer, do you still go back to that spec all the time, or do you just kind of learn from other people's code? What you can and can't do. Like, how often do you reference the doc?
Yeah, it's a lot. So I like to think of the spec as kind of like the world of possibilities. And so it's a lot of individual Lego pieces that need to be compiled. And so I like to look at others' code so you can see creative ways they've put all of these Legos together to create kind of a bigger experience. But the spec is great for understanding kind of how you can customize further from that. So I guess to show you a bit more, if you can add these properties pretty easily. So if you do line layer, you can see all of them kind of autofill in Xcode. So you can see you can have a dash array, you can add gradients, you can add gaps, you can change, for example, it can change the opacity. So I like to usually start with poking around in Xcode and seeing the initial one, then be like, okay, well, what's the limitation of line color? Can it be any color? How can you pass a different color? And that's the style spec's really helpful for kind of seeing the whole range of choices you can make.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, good.
You go.
Oh, we have a question from Ryan. So he says, what about an update to the user's location? Is that an event, or is there some other way to observe for changes to the user's latest location? Because I think you mentioned the event for when the map loads.
Yes, that's a great question. So the user location is kind of a special case because to respect the user's privacy, you have to ask for permission before they share it with your application. So we have what's called a location consumer, which we have some documentation on. I'm happy to follow up after and share this documentation with you. But essentially what the location consumer does is it asks the user for permission. So if you have an iPhone or an iOS device, you probably have this prompt saying, would you be willing to share your precise or general location with the Mapbox application X or Y? And once we receive that permission, then we process that and turn it into coordinates. And then you can display that particular coordinate on the map. Usually it's like a little puck icon that shows the user. And then you can subscribe to events from that. So say your user is in a car and their location is changing pretty quickly. You can update the puck's location to follow them along. You could also say, if you have a user and you want to see if they cross a state line or a county line, you can flag that. So if you have this user and you keep getting updates for they're in this location, now they're in this location, and then say they cross the state line into New York, and you then light up New York in blue or something like that. So yes, so it's a similar kind of subscription model where you wait to hear about when the event occurs. But because of the privacy concerns around location data, there's a bit more you have to do to request permission from the user. So again, happy to share some more documentation about that. We also have some example code that shows it, which I think is a great place to get started, just to make sure that you are only using location data from the user with permission, which is the best way to go.
One more quick question from Johnny, who is watching in the webinar. He says, what about simulating the travel of a user along the route path?
Yes, so it's a great use case. I guess I can show you from our example app. We have an example of doing this before. So what you would do is say you had like a user puck icon that is my cursor. You would calculate the distance between say here and here, and then you would gradually update that puck location based upon the user's location. So yes, that's all possible. So you can both simulate user location movement, or you can take the live information from the actual user's or the device's location, I should say.
And does that, so this is me asking the question now because I'm familiar with things on the website, but is there, on the website, there's like a set data method that we can just call, and we're really just changing out the coordinates for an existing source. Is it the same way in the iOS SDK?
Yeah, so I'd say like, for example, what you would do is say this was, instead of a line of coordinates, this was just like a single coordinate for a user. You would just swap out this coordinate in your feature collection, and then you would update your data source here, and it would just change that, the underlying data, and then all the styling would switch there. And actually, we're about to switch out our GeoJSON, and so it'll be pretty much this kind of behavior. Yeah, actually, I'll just dive right into that just to show you. So one cool thing you can do with GeoJSON is to have different types of data all in the same GeoJSON. So for example, if you wanted to add like a polygon, you can drag this here, show this big polygon. And then you can see your GeoJSON has appended this new polygon to the existing data. So what we'll do is we'll take that, copy it again, and then we'll go back to our data here and change it. And so in the use case where you are updating the underlying data, this is how you would go about it. So you would just change this, whatever GeoJSON you have, this feature collection, update it live, and then the map displaying it, which show it afterwards. So to be build more clear, we're just going to add a new layer here. So in this case, we're going to add the polygon layer. And this is going to be a polygon. Oh, excuse me, it's going to be a fill layer, rather. And I'll call it polygon. We'll set it as the same source. And then we'll do some styling as well. So this time we'll do fill color of, let's do this one as dark gray. You may, I guess, also be asking what this constant value is doing, and why we can't just say style color is orange. So that constant means that you're setting this as like kind of a single value, that the fill color will always be dark gray and the line width will always be 20. There are options in Mapbox to have that change using what's called an expression. And say you wanted the fill color at zoom level 20 to be gray, but at zoom level 8 to be purple. An expression would allow you to make that change across zoom levels and kind of gradually switch between the two different colors. So it's a more advanced styling option. But in order to show that in this case, in order to show you don't want to have that, you would just declare it as a constant. So it's always going to be dark gray for the fill color. Just some background there. And then the last item we're going to do is just filter out the particular geometry type. So in this case, I'm going to have what's called an expression. So this will just, this is the equals expression. So it'll match for when the geometry type is equal to line string. And then we're going to have a similar one here for polygon layer filter. And this will match when the type is equal to polygon. And this type, so we're matching on type, and that's what's held here. So it searches this particular portion of the feature collection and only shows features that have line string as the type. So if you had a few different line strings, it would show all of them. But here we have the line string, and then we also have the type polygon. So that's what that filter is doing. And the last thing we want to do is just add our new line to the style. Actually, add our new polygon to the style. Go ahead and run that. Great. So as you can see here, you now have this new dark gray kind of rectangle that's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And so these kind of two examples just are kind of launching off points, but you can use GeoJSON to have all sorts of different data held within it. So say you wanted to have to display different regions as different colors to show like a choropleth map or some other type of data visualization. You can use your GeoJSON to store that information. So you can have your coordinates here and then different properties. And then you can have the map set certain visualization tools based upon that. So you can have this gray or this orange. And then if that information changes, all you need to do is update your GeoJSON, and then the map will adjust accordingly. So this is a great way to pull in kind of live data while having a preset set of styling options in your application here. So in this case, I have this GeoJSON that's kind of hard coded in my application. But you can also imagine a GeoJSON where you hit a backend API and you get this GeoJSON and then display the information on the map. So it's a pretty powerful tool once you grasp the basics. We have a lot of great resources on using GeoJSON as well. So I would recommend you dive into that if you're curious on how you can use GeoJSON. Any questions on working with GeoJSON or adding style layers and sources before we jump into some camera work?
So a question from Ryan. He says, so this GeoJSON source, is this an annotation? Can it be zoomed to bounds or selected or whatever you can do with an annotation? If not, when would you use this versus annotations? Yes, that's a really, really good question. So this is not an annotation. So this is within like the style itself. So to think about it a little bit differently, so we have these kind of like this mapview.mapboxmap.style. What we're doing is taking the style objects that we created up front and adding this information to that map style directly. So we're manipulating the map style and moving information to that. An alternative way to do that is to display data is to use an annotation, which goes on top of the map. So it might look like a little pin here, or you can also add other stylings like a circle or a polygon as annotations. The benefit of using annotations is that they're kind of always displayed on top of the map, and they have more extensible user interaction. So if you wanted to have a little pop-up appear when you
click on it, or if you wanted to have, say, the user be able to select a route and then navigate to it, you would use an annotation because it's very user interaction heavy. The benefit of using kind of GeoJSON and going into the style is it's a bit more performance, and you can also interact with other layers in the style. So for example, right now I've just added this line layer on top of the existing map, but I could switch it so that it goes underneath the labels here. So you have more of that power to kind of rearrange the map and interact with the map on a higher level.
In my mind, annotations are analogous in the website to markers. Do annotations always have to be fixed to a point, or is there any notion of annotations that are not points?
Yeah, so there are definitely annotations have to be tied to a geography, but they don't need to be tied to a specific point or even a type of point. So you can have like a marker that's a point. You could also have an annotation that's a circle or a polygon or a line. And they have to start with the geography, but you can shift that geography over time. So say you wanted to have a circle over the New York metro area, you could draw that as an annotation, and then you could have the user be able to drag that annotation around the map. So they start with a geography, but it's all up for manipulation, either by the user themselves, or you could also have a map event that does that as well, or a user location event as well.
So to say that back to the key difference is that annotations are sitting on top of the map, and GeoJSON, as the layers you've added here are part of the map style.
Yes, that's right. So it's the difference is, think about like you have the map and then annotations on top, and here we've done like everything is within the map itself. I guess on the iOS and also the Android side specifically, annotations also have, I guess, stronger interaction with the like iOS platform. So if you're familiar with the UI view on iOS, you can manipulate an annotation much more closely like a UI view. So for some developers coming from an iOS background, annotations may seem a bit more ergonomic to your use case. You may be more familiar with the type of coding there. Whereas if you're coming from a geospatial background, you may have more familiarity with line layers and sources. And so it may be a bit easier for you to work with those. Oftentimes, you can achieve the same outcome with either approach. It just depends a bit on how you like to manipulate data and what you're most comfortable with.
Ryan had a follow-up question that says, can annotations be created and animated in real time, just like you were talking about updating the data for GeoJSON?
Yes, absolutely. So it would be a slightly different approach, but you could also like pass a new set of coordinates and create a new annotation for each of these coordinates. And so instead of having this line, you'd have this new annotation that's here. So absolutely, you can have annotations change in real time based upon user interaction, or based upon like even just a timer. If you wanted to add a new annotation every 5 seconds, that's totally possible.
Awesome.
I think if you haven't seen our earlier webinar, Getting Started Basics, we covered adding an annotation. So if you'd like to dive into that approach, you're welcome to check out that video as well. We also have a lot of examples on our website that could be a great starting point for you. Great. All right, let's dive into some camera action. So cameras in the Maps SDK are really powerful, and what the camera achieves is the whole viewpoint for looking at the map. So here you can see we have this like camera options, and that has the center point, which is like where the map is centered around, and then also has the zoom level, the bearing, which is your degrees away from north. So if you wanted to flip it, and then also the pitch. which is a kind of the angled representation. So you should think about camera as almost like if you are a film director, like where you are putting your camera on a 3D representation of the Earth. So it's a really powerful tool to get your users to see the world from the angle you desire. So what we're going to do here is add a second camera and then zoom to that particular camera to show you that kind of transition. So right now we have this camera options. I'm just going to quickly pull that out of our view did load and add it to our class directly. And I'm going to add a second camera options. So camera options 2. And for the center point, we're going to create a coordinate, but we're going to flip some of this information. So we're going to keep it at the same latitude, but instead of -77, we're just going to make this positive 77.03. And then we're going to switch the zoom level. So say I'll go to zoom 10 instead. I'm going to switch up the bearing. Go to say 45 degrees, and then the pitch, we're also going to go to say 75, which is a pretty high pitch. And then in our camera, in our like map loaded events, we're going to do a camera switch. So you'll see just a similar kind of map view, camera, and then we're going to use this fly to function to move to our second camera. So we're going to take the second my camera options, and we're also going to add a timer. Let's see, so it's a duration. We're going to do 12 seconds for this. And what this function does is it takes whatever the current map view's camera is, and it slowly moves to whatever you set the second camera options to. So you'll see this work in a second. Just add that self so that the compiler is happy. So you can see this kind of camera movement slowly moving in. And also, so it's zooming, and then you can also see that this bearing switching as well as we move. Yeah. So the camera, as you can see, like really changes kind of the angle from which you view the map experience. And so to show you a little bit more of what we're talking about, I'm gonna add, let's see, and add a new function that switches the camera based upon some user input. So we'll start with adding what we call a gesture recognizer. And so we have a couple different gesture recognizers. This one we're going to use is called a tap gesture recognizer. And what that gesture recognizer does is it waits for a user tap and then performs some action based upon that tap. So we also have like a double click gesture recognizer. We have a click and drag. So any kind of user interaction you can think of, maybe like a user spin, we have different gesture recognizers. And so you can listen for those gestures and take an action based upon them in the map. So in this case, we'll just declare this UI tap gesture recognizer. The target is just going to be itself. And then the action is going to be selector. And then we're going to create a new function, an Objective-C function to detect this. So it'll be tap action. And then last thing we're going to do is just add this to the map. So the map view, you just add this gesture recognizer tap. And then we need to add our tap action function as well. So be Objective-C. We'll call it tap action. It's going to take in this sender, which will give us some information we can use. Cool. And then for now, we're just going to take this function and move it away from our map loaded event and instead have it based upon the user interaction to show you just a few different ways you can kind of wait for user action. So here, whereas before you had that like kind of immediate scroll, here it waits for a tap and then it occurs. So, and then you can also interrupt these as you wish. So if the user, since this is 12 seconds, which is pretty long, the user can interrupt that and just keep scrolling if they desired not to do that. We can take this a step further and detect where the user is tapping and then zoom into that area as well and change the camera angle to match it. So for this, we're going to have to get the coordinates from where the user tapped. So we can do that by doing map view, map, coordinate 4, and then we'll detect them from the sender. So the sender, location in the map view. And we'll create some new camera options. So and we'll just pass this center as these chords. Maybe we'll add a zoom level of, let's see, 8, and then a pitch 0. And we'll pass this camera here as the fly to. So we're going to shorten this a little bit. So what this is going to do is the map is now, because you added this gesture recognizer, it's waiting for this tap. So once that tap comes, it passes that tap to this function, gets the coordinates you're looking for, passes them to the fly to function, and sends the camera there. And you can repeat this as many times as you want. So if you want to, you can tap here, and you'll see it slowly moving towards it. One thing that's really cool about gesture recognizers is you only are modifying the one that you listen to. So you can still use like 2 fingers here, and you'll see that doesn't trigger the fly to. It's only when you do a single tap that you fly to. Here you can use the 2 fingers. You can also scroll like this, but once you hit the tap is when you have that action occur. So you can use a pretty similar approach if, say, you wanted to have like a double click, do a certain function, maybe show a pop-up or whatnot. Any questions about cameras?
All right, so Ryan says, this was one camera, but with different options. Can one have more than one camera to instantly move between locations? What is the best practice when it comes to managing what the user sees and changing the user's view of the map?
Yes, exactly. Excuse me. So this is actually, we have multiple different cameras here. So you have this, like the map and nip one, you have this first camera, which is this camera. And then on the tap action, you're creating the secondary camera and you're moving between them. So if you wanted to, you could switch back and forth between the 2 cameras. Does that answer your question?
Is it safe? We'll see if Ryan responds to that, but is it safer to say that I mean, there's really one camera that you're just sending new commands to, right? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yes. Oh, I see. Yes. So you have like one kind of camera viewpoint, and then the camera options switch the directions you're giving to that camera.
Yeah.
Yes. In that case, yeah. So you have like one stable camera, but you can send multiple directions to that through camera options.
And he mentions instantly moving between locations, which means like you use fly to here, but you could just set the center or set the zoom, right? You could, is there an equivalent method for that?
Yeah. So if you so I had this duration delay, which kind of has the zoom in effect. So you can just either shorten or remove that, and that'll be pretty quick as well. So you can see here, it'll go much faster. So we'll still have this animation, but it'll go faster. And then the other option, you can also just set the camera like this, and that'll like also switch it quickly, and it will not have the same animation in between them. So if you wanted to have kind of a rapid switch, that's probably the best way to go. So you have a few different options. I personally like the animation because it's a bit smoother for the user, even if it's a short one, just so they don't feel jerked around so much. But if you want to have that kind of jerked around feeling, you can also play it. I think if you're creating kind of like a game experience in particular, that could be really useful.
Awesome. Yeah, it sounds like you answered the question.
Cool, great. Great, and the last item I want to show here, I think we have some time left, is just walking through some terrain additions. So for this, we're going to actually jump back to Mapbox Studio. And I'm going to create a new style. And here I'm going to use outdoors. We're going to customize that. And then still in Mapbox Studio, I'm going to turn on 3D terrain and then adjust the pitch. And then we're also going to add a little bit of exaggeration on the terrain. So it's going to go 2.5. And as you can see here, that like mostly just makes kind of mountains pops up. So here you can see the Alps showing up. And really gives kind of a really great 3D experience for your users here. And then we also have this atmosphere option, which shows the sky. You probably saw it a little bit in the other application there. And you can load that same style that you've already created just directly into your map, and you'll see the same effect in Maps SDK. So we're going to publish this. I'm going to take that. I'm going to copy that, and then we're just going to switch this out pretty quickly. I'm going to change the pitch just a little bit to make it clearer and pull it in. As you can see here, we have still the same information. The base map has changed. As you can see before, we had kind of this like white atmosphere, whereas now we have this very cool stars option. You can also have a sun or display the weather conditions depending on the time of day. So there's a lot of options for adjusting this atmosphere to be more realistic. And then as you zoom into the Earth, you can also see the terrain pick up. So you can see the Andes Mountains here show up. If you zoom in further, you get more of that kind of mountain view. So that's one really cool kind of approach to elevation and really having a 3D feeling for your users as they experience it. Cool. Any questions about pulling in elevation into your style or using 3D maps more generally? Another item people often do is kind of building extrusion, which allows you to create 3D buildings. So if you zoom into a city, then you can feel like you're looking up at the top of the buildings. I don't have a demo for that, but I'm happy to share that afterwards if anyone has questions there.
So Ryan asked, is elevation data available at any point on the map with 3D?
Yeah, so I can show you. So elevation data. So we have this kind of guide to elevation data, and what it does is we have it's essentially this is what the elevation data looks like. So we'll always have some kind of information, and then we're changing kind of the height of the map to reflect that elevation data. So yes, the map will, if you include elevation, it will always have elevation options. And you can also always query the map to get the actual elevation. So say you are doing a hike and you wanted to see the elevation at the peak, you could query the map at the peak and it will tell you the elevation. And then you could say query it at your start point and see the difference between those two. So once you include the elevation data, you can use it as you wish within your map.
And we have one more question from George, who says, can I insert a building rendered in the 3D map? Well, I'll let you answer it.
Yeah, it depends a bit. So let's see. So
I would just probably show that you can show like the 3D building example from the web, because it's basically the same, same rendering.
Yeah, I think. So this is what the 3D maps look like. And as you can see, as you zoom in, you become a state. So you can add your own buildings, but one thing you have to be careful about there already being a building there. So it does take some filtering out of the current conditions. So say you have a different outline of this building that you want to show, you would have to filter out the existing outline to show yours. But if you just had like, say you wanted to add an Eiffel Tower here, you could absolutely just like add that on top if you have the coordinates.
So adding it as part of the layer would just be the same process that you're seeing here, where it's extruded as a layer. I know in the website, there's lots of like, there's 3D rendering engines that are kind of completely separate from the map that you can overlay. Does the same thing exist on the SDK or on the iOS side for like doing a proper 3D model?
Yeah, so there are some different frameworks in iOS. Their interaction depends a lot on the individual framework you're using. Because we use Metal as our renderer on, there goes the zoom, on iOS. So if you want to make sure that they interact with Metal well, but it depends a bit on what you're trying to do. But yes, the general principle of like pulling in 3D information is pretty similar.
Okay, do we have any other questions? I think we have to wrap up. So if you want to ask one more while we have a couple minutes left, otherwise I'll switch over to a kind of closing out slide, unless there's anything else you want to say as parting thoughts, Patrick.
Yeah, actually, the only thing I'd want to add is we have some really great documentation. Let's see, on our iOS side that I would really encourage you to take a look at. And especially the examples. So I only showed you like a small taste of what you can do with the Maps SDK. So I'd really encourage you to download our examples app, which is free and easy to use. And then it loads these in iOS and it gives you all the sample code. So you can start with something that works and then build your application on top of it. So it's a really easy tool for you. And I'd really encourage you to play around with it.
Awesome. Okay, I'm gonna share screen real quick and just take us out. That's all right.
Go for it. Thanks all for joining.
Yeah. So we have just kind of a parting slide with some resources on it. I want to plug our developer Discord server, and I will say Ryan, who showed up for this, has been in there and has been kind of a very vocal iOS user, and I hope more iOS users can show up because we would love to have a little more chatter about using the iOS SDKs in there, and hopefully Patrick can come by every now and then and say hello as well. So please join the Discord server and just be vocal and chat a little bit. Let us know what you're working on. Also check out the documentation, which Patrick shared a link to, and the demos, and this is how you can find us on Twitter. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I believe the next episode of this series is going to be about Mapbox Studio. So stay tuned for some announcements about that wherever you saw the announcement for this. And then of course, we'll publish this on YouTube very shortly, probably tomorrow. You can come back and watch this content. So thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you at the next one. Take care.